In the first 3 weeks, we scaled it to 40K MRR in 3 cities, and have afterwards then in San Francisco, for example, seen roughly 20% weekly growth.
See this guy? Julius Ritter. He took open source recipes from the Blueprint protocol by Bryan Johnson, prepared and delivered it to engineers and founders in the SF Bay area, and scaled the company from 0 to 40K MRR in just 3 weeks. Best part, he did all of this with just 1600 in cash and a bunch of friends. He saw an opportunity, created a great product, and madly executed since. I sat with him to understand how he manages the operations, how did he acquire the first few users, and what exactly his early life looked like to see how the dots connected.
Bryan Johnson, the health tech billionaire who has come up with a $2 million a year routine to optimize health and longevity, versus his aging process, which is what many people say, has also open sourced his recipes. Super healthy, gluten-free, vegan recipes, which we then decided to cook, prepare, and deliver in the Bay Area, Sydney and Melbourne. I did notice that Bryan Johnson was taking off, and it was manifold. I had a great team I was able to start this out with. I saw the potential for a big business opportunity, and we were able to launch in 3 cities at the same time, in Sydney, Melbourne, and San Francisco, because the team was international. And it's actually such an interesting business model. We found a very great way to take Bryan Johnson's recipes, this whole protocol, this whole diet, prepare it, and then deliver it to executives, founders, engineers all across the Bay Area. We posted about it, and it took off to an extent where our LinkedIn post was featured in an Australian business school class for a lesson in how to, become viral with your product launch, like how to create traction and virality. In the first 3 weeks, we scaled it to 40K MRR in 3 cities. Have afterwards then in San Francisco, for example, seen roughly 20% weekly growth. And yeah, that's how it all started, with some awesome Twitter posts and some awesome LinkedIn posts. And we've been building the brand ever since.
So you started preparing these meals, which had an open source recipe to it. But the very immediate moment you mentioned that you started selling this to founders, enterprises, did this come very naturally to you that you need to be selling to this specific audience? Because usually the journey for most people looks like they have a product and they're selling to the exact person who does not need that product. How did that play for you? Was this very natural and spontaneous and it just worked out?
I think the interesting part here is that product market fit was given from day one. Many startups struggle to find product market fit. We were super fortunate that this was well perceived. So we mainly had to care about product refinement and distribution channels, but we knew that there was a market for it. Let me start with product refinement. The meals of Bryan already taste great, super fresh. I've of course tried them for a decent amount of time before I started selling them, and I love them. But we felt like we can optimize for taste more, so we worked with Steve Jobs, former private chef, to get them up to gourmet standards. And so that happened in terms of product refinement. We just started with 2 meals at first, which made it easier in terms of unit economics. And the second part is distribution. How do you go about it? And we actually did something remarkably simple, which is automating Twitter outreach. Because, as you know, the entire tech community is on Twitter and is more approachable on Twitter than on any other medium. We all get spam in LinkedIn inboxes, we all get spam in our email inboxes, but Twitter is kind of untapped. And here's my philosophy and strategy, right? Since everyone posts on Twitter, you shouldn't focus too much on posting on Twitter, but rather DMing on Twitter. And since everyone DMs on LinkedIn, you can get much more leverage from posting on LinkedIn, because very few people have, quote unquote, the guts to put their personal brand out there and post on LinkedIn. And I think the combination of posting on LinkedIn and DMing on Twitter got us our first 20 customers.
You mentioned to specifically refine the recipes, you found out some smaller gaps around the taste of it. And then you had celebrity chefs. I'm not sure if these are celebrity chefs, but chefs who've worked for pretty known people, like you mentioned Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
I read
Yeah.
you had Mark Zuckerberg mentioned. So I want to understand
Yes.
what was behind this move.
Well, that's such a good question, because we did both, right? We refined it ourselves. Me and a bunch of friends just getting in the kitchen together and actually testing it out. For the Nutty Pudding recipes, we made multiple batches and see how it tastes and compared them in the fridge and looked and checked out how it was after a few hours in the fridge. And then we had like version A, B, C, D, E. And we did the same thing for the Super Veggie. But I was super fortunate to have that chef, Kelly, in my network from a past event where I met her. And I contacted her and originally asked her, hey, do you have any recommendations for people, chefs, etc. we can work with? And actually something quite marvelous happened. So we had someone lined up, and then last minute it didn't work out. And so she was like, you know what, Julius, we can work together. And I had never expected that honor of working together with someone who has cooked for, James Franco, Larry Page, Mark Zuckerberg, you named it. But she actually helped then just slightly modifying the recipe to optimize for taste. And this can start with the most simple things, like you won't believe it, things like cooking times of broccoli. It actually matters if it's 7 minutes or 9 minutes. The dressing composition matters. The arrangement matters. Sourcing the right organic dark chocolate, which checks off all the quality bars that Bryan sets himself, matters a lot. So she helped us understand the food sourcing like no one else could. She helped us understand gourmet cooking like very few other people could. And so we took then that refined recipe and came out with something that was incredibly healthy and incredibly tasty. And we're going to work with her together in the future for conferences and events and for catering gigs. But like just to stress something, the variations were so tiny and slight that maybe some people even wouldn't notice it if they didn't have the original version, because it's very important to us to stay true to the original protocol, right? But I think a lot of small 1% changes can actually improve the product by a remarkable margin. And that's what we did.
No, that's very valid. And if you look at it, Bryan probably created it from the perspective. Of course, he's put in lots of hours into creating these recipes, with probably working with. He's put in the resources in creating those recipes, but.
Oh yeah, he went through I think 16 iterations of the Nutty Pudding. Sorry, the Super Veggie. 16, I want to say, of the Super Veggie. One of them, Super Veggie. Cool. By the way, for the listener, the Nutty Pudding and Super Veggie are the two core meals that Bryan eats every day. Super Veggie for breakfast, Nutty Pudding for, I want to say, lunch. Although all his 3 meals are being eaten within a 6-hour window, and he's done eating at 11 a.m. So he eats from 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. And this doesn't apply to everyone. And many people actually prefer to have the Nutty Pudding, which is full of macadamia nuts, walnuts, cherries, strawberries, chia seeds, so like all the superfoods, in the morning, because it feels more like a breakfast treat than lunch. That just as a small explanation to anyone listening who doesn't know about the recipes.
Now you have the recipes ready. Who's preparing these recipes? Is it a bunch of your friends, or who specifically in the team ends up?
No. I think it's a good question, and I want to, make sure to make some things clear. We work with, readily certified professional chefs and caterers to prepare the meals. Kelly herself doesn't prepare the meals on a weekly or daily basis anymore. But we have like a proper kitchen in place, and like everything, certified around it. I do have to say, and I'm going to be honest, in our first week when we gave out samples, they were all prepared by us just in the home kitchen. And then also to like just friends of ours or friends of friends. And we invested like some upfront capital and a lot of time into getting them their food, and were thankfully rewarded by some amazing LinkedIn posts that helped us not necessarily create sales, but certainly awareness of the brand. So we pretty much did it like a scrappy startup, which is something I would only recommend in the food industry if you're giving it A, away for free, and B, give it to friends. Because let's say some of my friends had food poisoning, which I don't think would ever happen, but let's just say it happened, then they would be much less likely to sue us than if we gave it to a stranger. But we have all kind of standards in place. And I'm sorry to reiterate that and repeat that often, but I just want to make sure that people don't get the impression that I'm still cooking it in my Vita, it's called, in my Vitamix, in my own home kitchen or my own microwave or something.
No, I get that. You mentioned you started with a bunch of your friends. The initial few recipes were cooked by your friends, and you put in some capital. Are you comfortable sharing either the magnitude or the numbers in terms of what kind of investment did you put into it? And like you already mentioned that you wanted to keep it super scrapey, first try it within your friends and then think about
Yeah.
further. But how did that look like?
Yeah. So the good thing about friends is that labor costs are pretty like marginally low. So, but we definitely made it like really fun to do it together and experiment in the kitchen over a few sessions. But yeah, the initial costs were $700 for a mixer, for a blender. Then probably like $600 for all the, maybe a bit more, maybe $800 for all the food, because we also use some of those ingredients then to already give out samples. And then another, I want to say $200 for the car to drive around San Francisco and hand out the food. And I think we did that for 2 consecutive weeks. So all in all, I think the initial investment was only about, I want to say, 1,600 or something, maybe 2,000. However, that doesn't include setting up a legal structure and all the administrative stuff. But from a unit economics perspective and delivery perspective, that's all that's required. It's not that much money actually.
Mm-hmm. Since you mentioned you had to get some legal structure in place, which is very obvious, at what exact point did you decided to have that? Basically, formally
Yeah,
incorporating everything.
yeah, really good question. I think very, very rapidly. I want to say 5 days into the process or something like that. I decided to go with an online tool just because it was the fastest and most convenient. But I would probably recommend it to anyone who needs to do it quickly to just rely on an online provider. It does cost like another $600, $700 to set up a California-based LLC, for example.
Yeah. Did you have to get any other certifications, specific certifications with respect to food, apart from setting up an LLC, getting a bank account?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you need to get insurance, food-specific insurance, limited liability insurance. You should get you should get that. Although we're not preparing the food ourselves, it's important for us to guarantee that. And I also got a food handler's license card, just to learn more and understand more about the laws in California and, for example, at what temperature food needs to be kept and how the kitchen works. And why is that important? Well, I guess it's important because I can monitor the process in our kitchen and kitchens, because we're expanding, and be able to directly assess without some experienced restaurateur consultant what the quality standards are in any kitchen that I visit. So that's what we did. If we were to open our own larger kitchen facility, we'd have to get a whole set of more licenses, like our own catering license, which is not necessary for now, luckily. But yeah, those are the food-specific licenses you need to obtain.
Very smart, I think. And circling back to the investment that you put into in this thing was approximately 1600 to 2k. Did this started having that snowball effect wherein you were getting enough orders to compensate for the raw material and the costs that you might have to pay to the caterers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Two things. First of all, I actually paid the caterer from my own bank account for the first few weeks, just because the bank account wasn't ready yet from the company. But I think that's normal. Like that's what just happens in startups, and you can repay yourself that as a loan later. And second of all, for every single order we got, we were profitable. We made sure that revenue larger than costs. Super straightforward, super easy. It sounds straightforward and it sounds easy. You need to price the meals at a fairly high price, not only because you're operating at small scale at first, but also because the quality of the ingredients is so high, and because it's actually quite tedious to cut like 60, 70 pounds of broccoli and cauliflower. So it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And so we had to price it fairly high, and the margins in food are notoriously slim. Like that's just a fact. But we still managed to be profitable for every single delivery that we've done so far. I always say profitably bootstrapped is the best way you can go. There's this narrative in Silicon Valley that raising a certain amount of venture capital is sexy, which can be if you need it and if you need to pay yourself rent. And I'm sure that VC money could be helpful for us. But right now where we are with Basis, it's not a VC case. We have, of course, a few ideas of what route to go down in the future and what, how to expand our offering. But for now, I'm very happy that we are in that situation we're in.
We spoke about product refinement. You had certain cycles of variations taking over until you got that recipe that you were convinced with. At least the bunch of friends that you had, they were very convinced with that. And then you also started getting some good feedback from the people you were serving. Now, anything that you'd like to add to the product refinement process that we might have missed? Anything with respect to how you structured the packaging of it, which is very interesting, very transparent when I first saw the box.
Yeah, I love those questions because those were like both problems for us. First of all, our nutty pudding somehow came out is slightly like a bit too liquid. Some customers liked it, many didn't really. So that was the direct feedback we got. Right? How did we get it? Well, I made sure to have every single customer on iMessage, so they could reach out to me anytime. Would I do it again? Probably not from my private iMessage, because what ended up happening is I would miss messages just because it was mixed up with my private account, and someone would tell me, "Oh, Julius, I'd like to cancel for next week." Then I would miss the message, and we'd still ship them food or still charge them, and then the whole customer service and customer success process starts. I think we actually lost a fair chunk of customers due to that because we had to refund them, and I made sure the customer service experience was as frictionless as possible. But once you have an issue, you don't see a brand as like flawless anymore as you might have in the beginning. So that was a big learning and mistake I made. And in terms of packaging, we tried a lot of different packages. Important was for us to not use plastic, but use compostable, BPA-free packaging, which definitely poses a challenge because you don't want to use any packaging that gets wet and somewhat moldy in the fridge. But which is hard with paper-based packaging. The second problem is, how do you deliver it? Like what kind of bags do you use? And we started with paper bags because they were cheap. But we realized we'd much rather take a hit on the margins and use high quality bags that can even be reused if people would like to, which makes the entire product feel much more like a premium offering. So I think those were two really good learnings.
That's pretty interesting. I also saw a picture of yours with a customer, and you had this caption to that picture called doing things that won't scale. And you mentioned
Yeah.
you've been having people on iMessage doing customer support over
Yeah.
there. So anything special, any other stories that you'd want to highlight from there?
I made, like, for many of them, I sent a personalized video being like, "Hi, I'm Julius. Like, you have a face to the name now," which helps create trust, in my opinion. Another one could be doing the deliveries yourself in the beginning. I don't do it anymore. We've outsourced that to three drivers, but I think it was super impactful. And you learn a lot about how logistics work, which parts of San Francisco are notoriously hard to reach, that it's hard to park a car in certain areas, that it's actually always takes longer than expected. And that also made it like some sort of adventure. Again, I was fortunate enough that a friend of mine helped me 1 week, and then the other week I was able to, that's actually a funny story, I was able to work with an Uber driver whom I had met months back after he drove me home from a bar night in San Francisco. And we had such a conversation on the way from San Francisco to Palo Alto, where I used to live last summer, that I stayed in touch with him. And he, was interested in startups. And I reached out to him like, "Hey, man, we need a delivery driver. We're starting this new thing." And so he helped me deliver some meals himself there as well. And yeah, I think another thing I want to add is you never want to build a network when you need a network. Because in the beginning, you want an introduction to, let's say, for example, I said Mark Zuckerberg's private chat. You're not going to start finding people then, but ideally you have a friend who's very willing to make the introduction. So whatever you can to build a genuine network of people who support you, of champions, I do it as soon as I can and without any greater goal in mind. Just people you already like. I don't want to call it networking, but just build people who can champion for you, who can vouch for you, and who are also willing to help. Because people want to help. I want to help my startup friends, and my startup friends want to help me.
That's very. I don't think people realize how important that is. For me, it's a very important point. I've never done networking my entire life, and I think you've been so much involved within communities and starting those communities. I think that's what I was talking about. Somewhere the dots there connected. I'm
Yeah.
guessing. And
Yeah.
then you mentioned the exact point that you don't network when you need the network, and you did that networking while in college, and that helped.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And just to add to that, I think being a student has disadvantages and advantages. Let's start with the advantages. First of all, you have your university email, which gives you credibility by default, which makes it less likely that your email lands in the spam folder. Two great advantages. Another advantage is whatever project you start, whatever network you build, if you quote unquote fail or decide to give up, that's not a problem. You're just a student. Like, you always have that framework, and I think university can give you lots of stability. The disadvantage, maybe another advantage, is you can always play to the fact that whatever you do is a class project. You can always say it's a class project. Ideally, you don't lie. I'm not a fan of making stuff up, but ideally you make some sort of connection request part of your entrepreneurship class project. And people are very willing to give back, and they don't expect you to have any deeper intentions, which is not true if you use your company email, because if you reach out to someone, the first reaction is always going to be, what are they trying to sell me? Stay away, please stay away. So 4 awesome advantages. Disadvantages are you're also just a student. Like, you don't have anything to your name. People already know that you're young and rather inexperienced, and it makes it hard to establish credibility. But I think, especially psychologically, the disadvantages are outweighed by the advantages of having that student email. So use it as long as you can and build a network through it.
That's very interesting. I want to. So, since we are talking about networks over here, you also have an advisor for Basis. Talk us about, was he through the start? Why did you choose to get an advisor on board? We don't see quite often, at least with the startups or companies that are just starting out to have an advisor right from the beginning? Because Basis in itself is
Yeah,
very young. I would love to know.
yeah. So I think in our case, it doesn't really apply to how other startups operate because our advisor used to be one of the founding members, but for him it was just from the get-go not a full-time thing, which is why the advisor role made more sense for him, and he's running another health company. So the answer, I'd love to give you more context here. We have another advisor of ours who has tested the product, loved the product, and wants to help us grow is Esther Wojcicki, the godmother of Silicon Valley, who we haven't listed on the website yet because there's like no, official equity-based relationship in place. So I'd probably call her a mentor. But I think mentors can go a long way, especially like holding a mirror in front of your face and making sure you don't lose yourself on the way and don't get lost in anything from legal fees to distribution channels.
Got it. And what kind of conversations are we speaking of in onboarding a mentor or an advisor? Did he come from someone you already knew or from the networks that you built?
So he was a friend in that case. But I wanna answer a question more broadly. I wanna what is an advisor like and what does he help with? So how it usually works, and I'm happy to learn more. I'm not an expert on the topic, but how it oftentimes works is you'd get some equity for your advisorship, almost like how an angel would buy themselves into a company, and an advisor would just offer guidance and expertise and credibility / brand and network. And then they would get like roughly, say, 0.2 to 1% of the company. Maybe more, but I think that's usually the area that makes sense. And how do you find them? Well, again, ideally, you know them already from before. They could be a professor if it's a deep tech or software product. They could be people from the industry whom you've convinced of yourself through cold outreach or a warm introduction. They could potentially be someone in your family, but I don't think that comes across supernaturally. Then there's the question: should you put your advisors on the venture, on the VC deck, on the pitch deck? And I would only put them in the appendix. I wouldn't put them on the core team slide unless they have like a really big name and capture lots of attention. A friend of mine has an organization that is advised by Sam Altman. Of course, you want to put his name, if he's comfortable with that, everywhere you can to establish credibility from the very first second in a VC pitch. I think this is actually an interesting thing to think about. The more experience the team, the more logos and credibility the team has already, the more return you get, or the more attention you get from putting the team slide in the very beginning of any pitch deck. Because then you establish credibility from day zero, from second zero, that you're showing the VCs what you're thinking of raising money for. So that was a rather long question from like advisorship, mentorship to pitch deck building, but I hope it gave you a sense of how I feel about these things.
No, certainly. Why did you start at three locations at once, which was Sydney and Melbourne, and then also SF?
That's just like very, very straightforward. I'd love to present you like a precise business plan, but my co-founders are from Australia, and they reside there. So that was the main reason. And we had champions in every respective regions, and are now looking to build a model where we can scale also within the US more sustainably. We're going to launch into new cities soon, which we're going to announce, of course, and that's very exciting actually. It's very cool.
But how common is that? We have stories of co-founders located across borders. I had my co-founder in the States a year ago, but we never thought that, hey, I were planning, we never thought that let's just open one there and one at my place. I think that's pretty unique, especially when you're just starting out.
Yeah, so I knew one of my co-founders from Berkeley already, so we had the personal connectedness, which is, I think, important. I also want to say, I don't think it's optimal. I'd rather work in one office. I'm not a big fan of remote work. So that's a sacrifice we made. We made it semi-intentionally. Just because everything moved so fast, we didn't really think or talk about it too much. I do feel like it is becoming an issue more and more and more, because being in a room with someone makes it so much easier to improve communication, to eradicate any sort of misapprehensions before they even become a severe topic, which might eventually harm your performance of the company and your team spirit. I don't have an original take on it. I think everyone who has said we need to get employees back to the office is right in most cases. I think there's certain companies, especially, for example, design agencies, where it can work super well of having everyone spread around the globe. But I think for like a startup at those early stages, it's just great to have everyone in a room.
No, that makes sense. There's certainly two sides to whether to remote work or to not, and the sides are very, very one-sided to be the same. For example, you're a strong advocate of non-remote work, and then
Right.
people would go absolutely crazy about keeping everything remote. Finally, would love to touch upon competition a bit. I think it's one of those things wherein competition hasn't been very prominent. When you look from consumers' point of view, you won't have tons of companies reaching out to you to get a Blueprint subscription. But there certainly are a few companies operating in the Bay Area, for instance, where you've been operating. So how do you see that, or whether it's significant in the first place or not, because the market is one huge to an extent and also very, very nascent.
There are a few players. I know of two others, and like I think there's a third provider offering Blueprint meals. Every startup founder who says they like competition, I think, is somewhat either driven by the wrong values or not quite honest. Of course, I'd rather have a monopoly of the market. But at the same time, healthy competition shows you quite reliably that you're onto something. And I think that was the important part for us. And the market, as you've said, is huge. Like, you can sell D2C, you can sell to startups, gyms, offices, more, right? I think we see a paradigm shift in how much people care about healthy food. And that other meal delivery services like Factor, like, I don't want to name any others because I haven't tried that many myself, but I know, for example, that Factor uses lots of plastic for their meals, which is not nice. For others, it might be the case that the food is not super fresh, or that it doesn't taste as good. And we really try to, check all these boxes. Super healthy, super tasty, and super convenient, delivered to your door every week. So I actually I do see advantages to there being competition. I don't think it matters too much because the market is quite big.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you guys sell via food delivery apps at the moment, or is that something maybe on the roadmap?
Do we sell at food delivery apps right now? No. Why? Because they usually require you to, they don't require you, but they recommend having the kitchen operating for many days of the week. And how we can operate profitably is by not being on standby all the time, right? Because that would increase the fixed costs by an insane amount. We might give it a try. I actually love the idea. I've been talking to Uber Eats and DoorDash and a few others, but it's not the highest priority as of right now. Because again, D2C is just really hard. We might have now exhausted the channels. Maybe now is a good time to switch the focus. But at the same time, you don't want to dilute your energy too much. Like, getting operations right is pretty hard in food tech. It's pretty hard.
Do you want to do a quick plug of any principles, as in 3 key pointers anyone should be looking out for when reaching out to people? Because it's not super easy either.
First of all, especially on Twitter, you want to create the impression that it is an absolutely natural conversation, which means, and this is, I think, my biggest life hack that I've learned, including small typos, which sounds kind of weird, but it works really well because people get the impression, oh, this message was sent to me personally, and this, Julius just missed a key. Yeah. So make it feel natural, make it feel conversational, keep the message short. And I would also say, I don't have any data on this, but I want to say, don't sell on the first message. So our template would be, hey man, I just saw you followed Bryan Johnson. By the way, we've been cooking the meals for ourselves and for friends and have been starting to deliver them to folks in the Bay Area. Let me know if that's interesting. And I think our template was even shorter and even more casual, but something along those lines helps very well. Second thing is, you want to, of course, have a follow-up sequence. And I think a mistake we made is not sending in the website. So we kept saying, please, something like, oh, by the way, all our food is organic and locally sourced. Or like some other follow-up messages. I don't quite remember. What we should have said is like, oh, by the way, forgot to send the website, right, in the second message. That would have been much, much stronger. And I think thirdly, the third thing might be preparing, answer templates, because I found myself a lot of times just typing the answer straight away, thinking, it's going to be fast. But this like fast, quote unquote, communication, direct communication, just accumulates to many, many hours sitting in front of your laptop in your Twitter DMs. So those are maybe 3 key pointers.
I am aware you've been doing a bunch of things besides bases. I think that would be pivotal in understanding how all of those dots connected. Would love to understand your early journey, who Julius is.
So I have quite an interesting journey, and I like to look at my background in terms of accelerated growth, if that makes sense. So I grew up in Germany, I'm from Germany, and have lived like a very, I'd say, normal standard life until I turned probably 20 when I came to the US. Studying, getting good grades, focusing on sports, health, but doing nothing crazy, producing a lot of different kinds of music, which still keeps me going these days. We can talk about that later. But I think to kind of, start where it's relevant, my real entrepreneurial journey started in the US. And I'll tell you really quickly what I did. I always wanted to study in the US, and so I managed to make the most out of my exchange student program from my home university in Berlin. And they allowed me to get to study for 1 semester at NYU and then at Berkeley afterwards. And I then convinced the international office to let me stay for 1 more semester. So I got this amazing free Silicon Valley education. And I think what was interesting is that I had a very short timeline to then make as many things possible within this 1 year of being an exchange student as humanly possible, I want to say. And before we dive deeper into these things, I became so hooked by the Bay Area, became so hooked by the talent density here, that I then decided to stay here, largely canceling many plans I had made and disappointing my family probably in many ways, and getting a visa here and working on my startup ideas here.
Germany also has lots of nice institutions. What was your rationale behind that strong desire to come to the US? Again,
I might be post-rationalizing my desire. So I think in 2019, 2018, I realized that it's just very limited. There's a glass ceiling in Germany, and that's a hierarchy. And I didn't feel that was the case in the United States. I also didn't necessarily chose the best institution for what I wanted to study, which was originally just plain business in Germany. So I always had this, imposter syndrome of being since the reputation of a university is great in general, but not particularly, well connected in the world of business, I need to compensate. So I was so happy to find these universities as part of my exchange program, NYU and UC Berkeley. And I think the other question you asked is, doesn't Germany have great institutions? And I'm really, really fascinated by ways we can improve education. I think Germany is at least 15 years behind in terms of the closeness of professors to students and in terms of digitalization.
that's interesting to know. Then you come to the US and you mentioned you wanted to maximize your kind of stay here for a year. What were the efforts that you put in to kind of maximize that?
I came to the Bay Area from New York, and New York is a hyper distracting city. And I don't think I've progressed. In fact, I think I've become a worse human being there. But the good thing was I understood how campus life worked and how student life worked, and that you can gain a lot of leverage and that it's also a lot of fun from or to starting student organizations, registered student organizations, because this is largely what the community at NYU and Berkeley revolve around in many ways. So I came to UC Berkeley and then just randomly told some friends, let's start a calisthenics club, like an outdoor workout club. I lived in this international dorm, so it was easy to organize people, and for the first session have 30 people get their hands, feet, and body dirty and sweaty during sunset with, guided workouts, push-up sessions, etc. It was incredibly fun. We set up a website, we registered the organization, and I realized, wow, this is not only easy, this is also super, super fun. Next up, I started realizing I don't need any credits anymore, or like very few credits, to finish my degree. So what did I do? I took, I'd say, classes that interest me mainly. I took classes which were like, I always try to take one hard class or two hard classes per semester, but the rest like to be just rather easy, and build good relationships with my professors, whom I genuinely admired, and felt like throughout that year, a few things become more and more relevant to me and more important, which are, first of all, AI, and second of all, investing. So I participated in like a venture capital investment competition committee thing, which I don't ever talk about anymore, because the other thing, the AI aspect, became so relevant and predominant. If you remember, November 2022, exactly, around that time, I don't want to mention ChatGPT, but it's just what kicked everyone off, and the hacker community started building a lot more in the space. So I had this idea of starting in a community which combines AI entrepreneurship with a human-centric approach and mentorship from people who are in the AI space already. And I approached this like a startup. So I thought, okay, if I start this organization, what was later going to become the largest AI student community, I want to say on the West Coast. How do I start this? Well, first thing, I always start my projects with a website. I buy a domain, and then for me, this project has been started. Then the team, and then talking to as many people as possible in the process to refine the product, right? So I bought the website aiontrepreneurs.org for this new organization. And then what did I do to recruit the right people? I worked with the local accelerator together, Berkeley Skydeck, and set up an event with them. And usually, you know how pitch competitions work. People pitch a startup, but I wanted people to pitch themselves as entrepreneurs. And so I had this whole database of, I want to say 100 people applied maybe, and we got like 10 people to pitch. And afterwards, I set up coffee chats with everyone there. And that way found, my partner in crime to then set up this incubator. And then the next semester, second semester at UC Berkeley, we decided to launch that organization, right? And you can tell already that it's the second organization in my second semester at UC Berkeley. And actually, I did like a third organization as well, which was the German Student Association, something we later, formed. So something I've never noticed until this point of time is how much I enjoyed community building. And for the next months, like from January to May, given the surge in AI, we had built an incredible network of students from freshman to postdoc, all working on creating the new and best AI startups, anything from a GPT wrapper to so many cool projects, robotics projects, computer vision, first drones, so insane stuff. But incredible network with VCs, because it's actually surprising how hard it is for VCs to get access to the networks, to the student networks at universities. And I'm saying this as a recommendation to everyone and anyone out there. If you can help venture capitalists get access to the talented people at your university, it's very likely that they're going to help you sponsor events, that they're going to be part of your network down the road. So that was a huge learning. And I also refined my community building and event moderation skills. I love getting people together, speaking at events. And at one time we had this, we were at the business school, Haas Business School in Berkeley, and we had two partners from PIVC, one of the most renowned startup accelerators and VCs in the Bay Area, talk about AI in enterprise and business. And the auditorium had never been that packed and that filled. That's what I've heard from the business school organizers, because AI was such a big topic for everyone, right? So I think we also got really lucky in terms of the timing, right? And basically what happened then is this community building effort and leading such a growing hacker group of young talented engineers gave me access to a much broader network of people in this space, and then allowed me to start a company, machine learning consultancy, with a friend of mine, the same guy who I also started the AI incubator with. And I think there's probably still an arbitrage opportunity by doing machine learning consulting in terms of charging, I want to say high rates, not overly high rates, but I think making just a decent amount of money with it. And then over the summer, at the end of the summer, I started Basis Health. And that's been now 5 months ago. And for me, just the density of events and new projects from August 2022 to August 2023 was unparalleled. And I want to close the circle here, because I started saying I look at my life in terms of growth acceleration. And when I look at the first 16, 17, 18, 19 years of my life, not a lot happened, right? But then it became more and more and more throughout my stay in the Bay Area, which I think has been the most impactful location in my entire life.
This goes down into the history as one of the archives for Julius sharing his journey building bases and the very, very early days of that.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you, Shivansh. Looking forward to get every listener's feedback, comments. You can always reach me on LinkedIn. Just look for Julius Ritter. And yeah, very much looking forward to anyone's feedback.